What would happen if you only work with customers that produce the greatest amount of happiness and the greatest amount of profits? What would your life be like? What would life be like for you to be in that zone? Today, I got an interesting topic, and today we're going to talk about something called the Pareto Principle. Yes, the Pareto Principle. And I like the Pareto Principle. It was a theory that was really designed by, it was actually an observation, not really designed. It was more of an observation, and it was an observation by Wilfredo Pareto. And what Mr. Pareto noticed was that, he lived in Italy, and he noticed that in Italy, 20% of the population actually owned 80% of the property in Italy. Like literally 20% of the population owned 80% of the property in this country. And he started noticing this 80-20 kind of thing kind of play out in other areas of his life. And he started to create, for you guys that are like kind of scientific hypotheses out there, he created this hypothesis that, he thought that maybe this ratio wasn't just something that was happening isolated in Italy, but it was something that was happening throughout. And what he hypothesized was that this ratio of 80-20 could be found throughout many places, right, that we encounter, whether it be physical locations or just natural law, that this 80-20 rule really played out across a lot of different areas. And I bet that if you look at your own life and you look at just your own consumption, how you use things, I bet that you find that this is probably true for you too, right? That you probably have this favorite pair of shoes, right? I have a favorite pair of shoes that I leave right by the door. I have one pair of sneakers that I like to just kind of slip on, don't even tie them. I have like a pair of wedges that I like to wear when I'm heading out the door. And, I have a whole lot of shoes. In fact, I have a whole closet of shoes, and I only use probably 2 pairs of shoes regularly, right? Those are my favorite shoes. And, it's just how it works. That's the 80-20 in the law of shoes. And, I hear about people that have all these multiple cars, like I have a client, he just went out and he bought, what was that car? It wasn't a Lamborghini, but it was a pretty nice car, but he's got many cars. And it's interesting because he only drives one car regularly. Whenever I see him, he has like this Escalade, and that's the only car that he drives. And so even though they have multiple cars, they only really use one car, right? And it's the same way in the closet. When I look at closets, and you probably look at your closets, he has a whole bunch of different clothes for different events that you've attended, different purposes. And you probably only use 20% of your whole clothing wardrobe too. I have my favorite pants. I have my favorite business jacket. I have my favorite things that I always wear all the time. And I never venture out really to put on the other things, even though they're there in a closet for that one day, that special occasion that might happen, they're there. And so what you're seeing here is Pareto Principle applies, right? It's happening, it's playing out through life, whether it's your shoes, whether it's your clothes, whether it's cars, if you have multiple cars, it's playing out throughout your entire life. And it's interesting because Pareto also applies in business too. I'm a CPA, you guys know that. And I look at hundreds of financial statements every year. And in every single case that I'm looking at a client's financial statements, when I drill down on their financial statements, there's usually something that I notice. It's a phenomenon that it's usually 20% of their customers or 20% of their product line that they're selling that makes up 80% of their profitability. Literally 20% makes up 80% of their profitability. And, I look at these clients and I'm like, what would happen if you let go of 80% of your clients that really weren't adding to that bottom line, right? What would happen if you let go of 80% of your clients that were really just using your time, draining your resources, right? Using your money, because some of those clients are actually running at a loss and they're being financed by those 20%, right? What would happen if you just focus on that 20%? What happens if you just focus on the 20% of customers that are really driving your bottom line? And so today, what I want to do is I want to talk about how to implement the Pareto Principle in your business. Yes, implement the Pareto Principle in your business. Today, I'm going to talk a lot about theory. I'm going to give you a lot of action steps. And next time we meet, I want to see how it works for you. I want to see what you discovered and maybe even help you if you need it in terms of drilling down. And so when I start looking at Pareto Principle, one of the first things that I do is, a lot of you guys are using QuickBooks, is I go into QuickBooks and I run a list that has revenue by customer is what I do. List revenue by customer, no matter what it was, that's going to come out in a QuickBooks report. And then once I do that, then I import that into Excel. And then when I'm in Excel, what I do is I sort it from the largest to the smallest. So I'm taking your customer list and I'm sorting their revenue from their highest revenue customers to their lowest revenue customers. And if you're a product-based business, right, like retail or you're wholesale and you're selling products, it's a little bit difficult to sell by or to sort by customer, right? Because, you might have millions of customers. But what we do is then we sort by product, right? Or item. And we literally take item and the revenue by that item and we sort it from the highest to the lowest is what we do on a product-based business. And again, what we're trying to do is see what are your most popular items, which customers are producing the most revenue for you is what we're doing with that. And then once we have it into Excel, what I do next is I literally highlight from the highest customer, right, in terms of that revenue down to up until I get to see about 80% of your revenue is what I do. I literally highlight it. And it's interesting because what usually really just amazes people is they're really surprised to find out how few customers actually make up 80% of their revenue, literally. And they're just always shocked. They're literally shocked if they have 100. It's always the top 20 customers that make up 80% of that revenue for them. And then what I do once I've got an idea of who are the highest customers, then I take that same list that we created from QuickBooks that I've dumped into Excel, and I start to rate each customer based upon the happiness factor. So how do you feel when you meet that customer? That's exactly what I'm looking at. I'm looking at, does this customer, when they call you and they've got a question, are you like super excited to jump on the phone with them? Or is something going like suddenly you got to go to your chiropractor, your neck kind of hurts, your back kind of tenses up. What is that feeling, those emotions that are going through your body when this client calls? And what I'm looking for now is I want you to rate each customer. Now that we sorted by revenue, I want you to put a smiley face next to the ones that bring you absolute joy, that you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to see you, or that cringe factor, like, oh no, let me go hide underneath my desk, right? So I want you to put a happy face next to all the customers that you enjoy. And then I want you to put a sad face next to the ones that give you that cringe factor, right? And then anybody that's left over that doesn't have a face, you just give them a neutral face, like a non-happy face, non-sad face, just a neutral face. And if you're in a retail type of business or in a product-based business, you can do the same thing for your products too. Which ones do you enjoy making? Which ones do you enjoy selling? Which ones require a lot of work? Which ones are getting a lot of returns that have to come back, that you have to do rework on? And so you want to sort those products too, the same way as you would do a customer list if you're more in a product-based business. And then what I want you to do then is I want you to go back into your QuickBooks and I want you to run a job costing report. And I know a few of you guys have already implemented it. If you haven't implemented it, I would definitely strongly recommend implementing it because that's the first step, really detecting efficiency, knowing on where to hone in your time. So what I want you to do is go into QuickBooks and run a profit by customer report or a profit by job report if that's how you have it set up. And what I want this to be for you is I want you to look at revenue minus direct costs, right? Because that's what the profitability report is going to tell you. It's going to tell you what the gross margins are per customer. And I want you to see, which customers not only are generating high revenue for you, but are generating high profitability for you too, right? Because high revenue doesn't necessarily equate to high profitability, right? I've seen jobs that have high revenue, but then they run at a loss, which isn't very good. And so then what I want you to do there is I want you to find that intersection. I want you to find that intersection between happiness, meaning I love doing this work. I love working with this client. I love making this product, and also high profitability or high revenue. That's where I want you to make that intersection. That I am going to put this little caveat there. Just because the revenue or profitability is high in terms of dollars, I also want you to take a look at it as a percentage from a gross margin percent, your profitability as a percentage of revenue too, because maybe there's some strategy in there, some golden nuggets in there, looking at it that way too. And I want you to look at that. And I'm looking for that intersection of happiness versus high revenue, because that's your sweet spot. That's where I want you to focus at and really grow. And so in terms of what happens next is imagine for a moment, just sit there for a moment and sit there and think about it. What would happen if you only work with customers that produce the greatest amount of happiness and the greatest amount of profits? What would happen if you only work with customers that produce happiness and the greatest amount of profits? What would your life be like? What would life be like for you to be in that zone? And I want you to write about it. What would it be like, to be able to work with that, right? To work with clients that you enjoy working with that produce a lot of profit. What would your life be like? I'll tell you this, you probably have more time, right? Definitely. Now, what I want you to do next, after you've thought about that, I want you to start looking at the trends. I want you to start looking at the trends of clients that have made you happy, that produce a lot of profit. And I want you to start looking for commonalities. Like, what is the commonality of this client? Do they hang out in the same places? Are they in the same industry? Because sometimes we have a propensity to go towards certain industries. What are the commonalities that these customers have that produce that high profitability and that happiness factor in you? And not only that, where did you find them? Where did you locate this customer? Now, I want you to answer that question, journal on it if you need to. And then I want you to think about, where can I find more of those clients? Where can I find more of those people that bring me great happiness, that I enjoy working with and increasing my profitability? And so where can you find them? Because that's going to really target your marketing strategy. That's going to really target where you're going to market at. Now, for those customers that are still on the list that have the sad faces, right? And they have the low profits, right? And everybody's going to have one. No one's going to get away with not having one. I want you to consider, what would your life be like if you decided to part ways? If you decided to part ways with the client that brings you sadness and no profit, what would your life be like? And I know there's an internal struggle, right? And nobody wants to lose a client, right? It takes so much work that goes into getting that client. Nobody wants to lose that client. But sometimes you have to give up to go up, right? Sometimes by focusing on letting go of things that are not working for you, things that are not really helping you or growing your business or growing you, even health-wise, right? Mental health matters, right? We got to think about that. What's happening is, by creating that space, right, you're making room for more blessings. So, sometimes you just have to trim, you just have to let go in order to have more come in. And, sometimes, I know it's difficult to do that, but think about something that happened in your life. Think about a time that you lost a really big contract. And I'm sure everybody has lost that for one reason or another, where that client closed, or they moved their office, or they decided to do things a different way. What happened to you? What happened to you after you got hit with that news? What happened to you? Did you implode? Did you self-destruct? What happened to you? Or did the opposite happen? Did you actually rebuild, and not only rebuild, but actually rebuild stronger, right? Which is probably the case for you. You probably rebuilt stronger. And it's a lot like trimming a tree, for that tree to grow healthy, right? Especially if it's got some type of, trees get diseases. I was surprised they get like bumps on them sometimes, but it's like a tree. For that tree to grow healthy, if it's been infected, sometimes you have to cut off some of the branches, right? You have to trim that tree for it to grow more healthy. And that's the same way it is in your business. Sometimes you have to make trims. Sometimes you have to make cuts. Sometimes you have to part ways, even though it doesn't feel good. You have to make that. A lot of people get stuck into that cycle of, am I going to have enough cash flow to make payroll, even though I'm keeping on this customer that at the end of the year, I know I'm going to run a loss on. And I'm going to challenge you, it feels like it's helping you temporarily, but actually in the long run, it's not helping you. So you want to make those decisions that are going to help you in the long run. So I hope that today was extremely helpful for you. And until next time, may the profits be with you.